All right. Good morning, everybody. Here it is, your Thursday morning edition of Gareth Cliff Show featuring Phumi Mashiho. There she is. I see her in the office again this morning, Phums. Is that a load shedding thing, or do you just have a bunch of things to do today? What is it?
Do you see me in the fancy shirt?
Hang on.
Like
Let me just turn this music down. Wait a second. There we go. What were you saying?
I'm saying, do you see me in fancy shirt with the bow and everything? This is what
I
this day
do.
is about. It's
Are
gonna be
you
a heavy day.
back-to-back meetings and getting shit done, huh?
I have had my hair's driving me crazy. I have had such a crazy days, such crazy days over the past. Yesterday, I had a meeting in Soweto. We were
Huh?
working on a project that's like bookshelves and libraries in townships, in association with an alcohol company, and so we're going to be putting them near and in some of their taverns. And so we went to see a couple of these new taverns in Soweto at 12.
Okay. Oh.
And we had to be at a presentation for another client at 3 in Kempton Park.
Oh my God. Wow. Kempton Park. I'm so glad you're alive.
Kempton Park. So today is also one of those. We've got an 8:30 meeting, we've got an 11:30 meeting, we've got a 2 o'clock meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So I just had to and be in the office.
Well, listen, I mean, good for you. Getting shit done is that's the byline. That's the key word. That's what everybody should be doing at the moment. We have no time to bugger around. There's some very nice comments coming through about how you've dressed up for us this morning. Nell Silver says, Phumi, looking pretty this morning.
Thank you.
And Nico goes, oh shit, it's Thursday. I thought it was Wednesday. Well, I mean, this happened.
Nico.
So yeah, yesterday I was in a couple of meetings as well. I mean, yesterday and the day before were pretty busy for me too. On Tuesday, I pretty much did, let me not exaggerate, but about 8 hours in front of a microphone, which is a lot, And by the last kind of half hour, I was going like a zombie. But I did interview someone from the US who I love talking to, a guy called Larry Elder, who is, he's an incredible guy, broadcaster, talk show host, documentary film producer, also very recently political activist as well. He's a Republican, but a black guy who doesn't get a lot of love from the Al Sharptons and Jesse Jacksons of the world. So an interesting guy to talk to, and has opinions that kind of get him put outside of the norm and the medium every other day of the week. What an interesting guy. We spoke for an hour and a bit.
Black people used to be Republicans. The Republicans, don't forget, freed the slaves.
That's correct.
So
that's right.
It's how things change.
It was only since Johnson and Kennedy that really black people switched over to the Democratic Party.
This is why Condoleezza Rice, this is why, those guys were...
Colin Powell,
Colin Powell, what's his name, the musician, blind musician? All of those guys were very, very strong Republicans.
Ray Charles, or are you talking about Stevie Wonder?
Ray Charles. That's because this is what the Republican Party used to stand for.
Right. Exactly. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves, Republican. The Democrats in the South used to, there used to be a whole bunch of KKK members who were Democrats.
They went to war. They went to war to stop.
That's right. So an interesting guy to talk to, and he has political ambitions too. I mean, he tried to recall the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, and Larry Elder actually came in second in terms of the number of votes. Obviously, he didn't get 50+1 to displace Gavin Newsom. But he got like between 3 and 4 million votes in the state
Sure.
of California. It wasn't even an election; it was just a recall. So that's incredible. I
A
think
by-election.
I think he'll do very well if he does run in California again. And California really not a very red state by any stretch of the imagination. Most of the districts. I mean, he goes into some detail on this. So I'm not going to preempt the whole interview, but a
Wow,
really
can't
interesting.
wait to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was an interesting day. But I was talking about how busy it was, and then yesterday I was talking to somebody. And I was like, "Oh, it's Thursday," and they were like, "No, it's only Wednesday." So I know what it feels like to get your days screwed up, Nico, because you think, "Oh wow, I've done so much. It must be Thursday already." And today is, so you can breathe a sigh of relief. Tomorrow, finally.
Who's Thursday?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I haven't done a Puzza Thursday in ages. I
Yeah.
can't do it in.
Shall I say it or will you? It's with the birthday coming up, Gareth. It's just the
No.
years ticking by.
Oh, I know. No, it's old age. It's definitely old age. Plus, I do not want to deal with a Friday morning show and then have a hangover. It's not worth it. It's
It,
not worth it, you know?
listen, hangovers are just not worth it. Even a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning with a bit of a hangover is still, it's not
Yeah.
cool no more.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Now, here's not some great news from Nico. He says the first mozzie arrived last night in the Swartberg. Some cold front is pushing this heat wave on. Tomorrow we cuck of the cold again. Yeah, this is unfortunate, and I hate to blame the month of my birth, but August is the worst because just when you think you're starting to come out of all the cold and the shit, then the wind picks up. That wind is icy. It brings in all this shitty cold wind from, I don't know, the Antarctic or wherever it comes.
I
Just
told
screws up
you
everything.
guys. I told you guys last week. Winter never leaves without drama.
Mm-hmm.
Winter never leaves without drama. There's always that last bit of like drama before it can be kind of sunny days. And here we are in the middle of that winter drama.
You're so right. So let's talk about a few things because we've got the burning platform later on. I think it's going to be the kind of burning platform a lot of people are going to be very interested in. It's very seldom that we get to do
I can't wait.
one or two issues in real detail, and we're going to be talking about these tavern shootings. We're going to be talking about crime. You've just been to a bunch of taverns, so you've seen a few of them, which you probably haven't for a very long time, Pums. I mean, you did grow up in Soweto, so you know the place, but they've suddenly become flashpoints, and we need to figure out what's going on over there because it's a very serious problem. I mean, if we were in any other country, the taverns would be front page news for weeks, but because we're in South Africa, they are already old news. And I mean, the number of people who were killed in those 2 weeks when we had this sudden outbreak, it was frightening and devastating, not only in the Eastern Cape, but up here in Gauteng as well. A lot of people very concerned about that. So we're going to speak to two guys who really are well positioned to talk about this. Gideon Joubert, who we've had on before, an independent security consultant and a firearm instructor. We've also talked to him about guns, which we can do again today. And Dr. Gerard Labuschagne, who's a clinical psychologist and a criminologist and an advocate of the High Court. We've spoken to him too. And between the two of them, we'll be able to put together some of the really important behind the scenes stuff that is going on. Also, we can talk about the anniversary of Marikana, which happened, just this week, and something which, again, seems like just yesterday, but it was 10 years ago this week that the Marikana
Yeah.
massacre.
I was obviously because of all the work that we did there.
Mm,
2017, 2018. This is comes back to me all the time.
yeah.
How that community how that community is, and how I can't wait. I can't wait for the burning platform. We have so much to talk about. People must stay on. Or if you can't stay on, you have to hit the podcast, I think.
Well, the other thing that we want to do this morning is you want to just bring up something because this is the kind of person you are. You've gone and done some research on qualifications that top employers around the world are looking for, and this could
So
interest a
you
few.
remember, because we spoke about it last week, we spoke about
Mm,
the universities losing accreditation
yes.
and we spoke about humanities and what you called useless degrees, which
Hmm.
which grated my heart a little bit because I'm a humanities sort of
Me too.
graduate,
Me too.
but
Yeah.
but but also but also I kind of, as I was thinking about it, so I thought I'm gonna like do a little bit of reading, do a little bit of research. Remember, I was telling you about PhDs, that I think we need more people who are knowledge creators. And the thing about research that you do for PhDs, that's what it does. It adds to
Hmm.
the knowledge base of a country. So I came across three things, which I thought, I'm going to take this back to Gareth. And
Hmm.
the one was a Cambridge study about
Yes.
what it would take for Africa to to compete, to become comparable. Is my Wi-Fi useless this morning? Someone is saying. We'll check it
Mm,
out just now.
it's just
No,
it's this I don't know, it's the cables or the clicking of the mic, or I don't know what the hell's happening there, but it gets like this, then sometimes it gets better and sometimes it gets worse. But just carry on, it's fine. We're gonna have to
and I've
manage.
changed cables anyway. So this study that Cambridge did about what Africa needs to compete, not just
Hmm.
with China or America, but with the rest of the world, and to pull itself out
Hmm.
of the terrible situation that we're in, is that in the next 10 years, Africa will need, let me look at this number, 1 million new PhD researchers in all fields, in
Hmm.
humanities, in science, in just to compete, simply because of the number of PhD studies that are coming from other countries, not just the US.
Wow.
I saw a tweet from the head of Ben Gurion University 3 weeks ago, and
Yeah.
they were graduating a class of 250 PhDs at Ben Gurion University. Like,
Wow.
Israel is hardly the length of our country, you know?
I know, and doesn't have nearly the population. I mean, how good are we at churning out PhD students in South Africa? What are our numbers?
Not very good. Not very good. We it has picked up, so kind of academia has picked up. We do have quite a number of people going all the way to PhD level, but not enough. Because if you look at this study and the numbers that, and then if you divide it across all the African countries, if everybody were to kind of contribute towards that, we here in South Africa should be churning out in the next 10 years something like 60,000 PhDs.
Hmm.
In, and then I thought, so then because we were talking about humanities, and I thought, but where do they go? Who employs PhDs, and what does this research go into? And one of the things that for me was mind blowing, VW is hiring 490 PhDs and PhD
Hmm.
candidates. Also, communications, human behavior. Of course, they're bringing in
Volkswagen.
engineers. Volkswagen, but you know why?
Huh.
Because
No.
with artificial intelligence, driverless cars, all of those things and all of those changes, they need to understand human behavior better and what it is that will make people comfortable to be in a driverless car. What do you
Right.
do in your car traveling somewhere and you're not driving? What do you do with all of that extra time?
Yeah.
What should, you know, all of those things. So maybe there is,
I'm just looking at this
and
now. So
linguistics.
we have 26 universities, right? This is just according to a quick search that I've done. A PhD is usually 2 to 3 years, um, and there are 40,712 students. So obviously, we're not going to be producing that many PhDs, but I mean, we should be so lucky, right? But we have we seemingly have enough universities to be able to produce a fair number of these. Is it because not enough people study up to PhD level? Or is it because PhDs are too expensive to attain? Or is it
Not
because
enough
people...
people not enough people study to PhD level. Remember that we're
Mm,
also in an environment where quite a lot of people are kind of coming out of and dragging the rest of their families out of a poverty situation. So
mm,
education is a pathway out of that. So they need to go and
right.
work. Um, we also don't have enough kind of just wanting to do it. Not enough people wanting to study all the way to PhD. Think about it.
Yeah.
Like a
Well, I
PhD
mean, we can't even
requires
get high school kids to do maths and science, let alone study, to PhD level, which obviously requires research. It's a much more complicated process than just getting a bachelor's degree and then saying, "Look, you can employ me."
Mm. And but the fact that there is employment for people with PhDs across all fields. So
Mm,
linguistics, natural language
sure.
processing is a thing now. So how do you talk to your computer or to Siri so that they understand you and
Mm,
your language?
huge.
All of those things are, it's definitely a pathway. And over and above, so the 490 PhDs that they are hiring at VW is over and above the 300 that they are producing internally.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's quite something. I mean, look, we are far behind. I mean, G Star brings up here the book by David Benatar, and I've interviewed David Benatar about antinatalism before, which is really an area that he is world
mm,
renowned in and for. He's written a book called The Fall of Cape Town University. Frightening what's going on there. The book goes into detail about how the decolonization narrative has ruined UCT. Well, I must get him on the show. I mean, that would be someone that you'd also want to talk to, right?
absolutely. So
Yeah.
can you see, this is how my nerding, over and above
Mm.
all of the other things, this is how the nerd in me, because I couldn't after last week's show and all of the
No,
places.
I know.
But
I
there
love
was
this.
also blowback. There was blowback about the shutting down of universities or decommissioning. I told you, it's bullshit,
Yeah,
these guys.
I know for sure.
They are up
Um,
to some shit.
but Kapamba says quite rightly, nobody wants to stay in varsity for 7, 8 years. We want money. I think that's what a lot of people think, that you go into university because you want to get a degree so you can get a job so you can earn money. And you have to be in a very unique situation to be able to put yourself into academia for almost a decade in order to attain these kinds of qualifications. Super
Look,
Jacob Zuma says first world countries fund PhDs and pay students while studying. We give minimal stipends.
so, but
Yeah.
this is what I was about to say, that, you don't have to be a full-time student. You just simply have to want it and you have to have the commitment. In the past 3 months, I have been
Mhm.
to two PhD graduations. I told you guys about the one with the guy
Yes.
with his maths. The guy is married and 3 kids. So he has a
Mhm.
job, he has work,
Right.
um, but he also studied towards this PhD.
Yeah.
So it's about more than just.
Colleen says quite rightly that research supervision capacity is also lacking in these universities. You need a supervisor for a PhD, and sometimes there just aren't people in numbers enough to allow for these kinds of degrees to be pursued.
This was also in that Cambridge study, that's definitely one of the things, that there's not enough mentors
Mhm.
and there are not enough supervisors to help accelerate the progress for
Well, I mean,
students in
again,
Africa.
this is not to fill from the back when it comes to like defending a position that I took, which is quite controversial, that we don't all need to be at university studying humanities degrees. PhDs are a different matter entirely, a different kettle of fish. And I think that, if you're going to go and study to PhD level, which I would advise anyone who really, really is interested in a particular subject to do, if you can possibly do it. And obviously developing a body of knowledge, particularly stuff that is useful here in South Africa and in Africa, would be great. There are so many areas that are not nearly as well explored, as well researched, and as well put together as we would like. and stuff that no one else in the world can do, particularly around our indigenous languages, our own history, our own ability to figure out resources versus energy versus, there's so
Our
many things.
communities, can you imagine the kind of studies that we could have just talking about artificial intelligence and driverless cars, about the behavior of groups of people in people carriers or people movers that are driverless, right? So
Taxis, yeah.
in a taxi, in a taxi where you have
But
10
you know what?
people.
I'm also thinking that what you spoke about last week when you told us about these tribal councils and how that could be, again, these are not areas that are pursued with any, massive volume at tertiary education levels. We tend to take our lead from other countries. We tend to take our lead from countries like America or the UK or, and maybe a little bit of Israel. But maybe we should be looking at developing some of these. Nevertheless, to go back to the point, I do think that a lot of people they study a degree because they feel they have to get a degree to do something. They do it to bachelor's level, like I did. And it's a waste of time. That is a waste of time. But if you're going to take it further, absolutely. G-Star says agreed. Phumi was onto something there. So yeah, absolutely with the tribal councils, I think. And Pihleng says, the interest to study PhD is there, but many universities simply do not have enough support for those students at that level. Also, many end with the first degree because funding is not there. That's also true.
It's true. This is definitely
Congo Chris
definitely
says,
one of the barriers.
I was fortunate enough to have been both a student and a first tutorial leader at university. The overwhelming narrative was that half the students weren't there to study or even attend class. Well, we know that university becomes like an extension of adolescence for a lot of people too. They don't necessarily have a place to go to and a meal and security and a home where they're not going to be abused or whatever. So university becomes that surrogate for a little bit longer, which, in this country, it shows you how society is a problem. That's not the university's fault, but they do become like a nanny for a lot of kids who are extending their adolescence in South Africa. And that's why we see so many of them behaving like that when it comes to university politics. And that's a quality of university politics, is that it must be a little bit fiery, a little bit young, a little bit idealistic. That's always the case at universities all over the world. But in South Africa,
fearless.
it has become kind of like the state looking after people's adult children for a little bit longer than they maybe should. And that's controversial, but it's worth it.
Maybe those are the areas we need to be studying too, understanding a little bit more about our communities and why they are broken in the way that they are, so that we can fix it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Carl says, what's the difference between a BA and a large pizza? A pizza can feed a family of 4.
I don't know where you're buying your pizza, Carl.
Yeah, because one pizza can barely feed me.
It definitely doesn't feed Ganejo.
No. Oh my God. No. Growing young men. The one pizza is not enough. All right, listen, we got to get into some news headlines.
I had 3 at my house for the past 4 days. 3 young men.
3 boys. Oh, you're in trouble. You had to feed all 3 of them.
I haven't gotten over the food bill.
All right, so here's a story. We all need another job, considering what's happening to our money at the moment. So this is something that comes up every year. It's a bit early, I'll admit, for us to be thinking about this, but Mariah Carey. Why does she come up every year? Because of Christmas, right? So a dispute has broken out over which U.S. pop singer can lay claim to the title Queen of Christmas after Mariah Carey attempted to trademark that. Someone called Elizabeth Chan, who exclusively performs Christmas music, has filed a formal objection to Mariah Carey's claim. The fellow singer Darlene Love took to Facebook to say that she's been the Queen of Christmas since way before Mariah Carey rose to fame. Carey's representatives have not responded to requests for comment. The trademark bid was filed in March 2021, but has only recently been made public. It is still under consideration. Now, of course, Mariah Carey's 1994 album Merry Christmas is one of the best-selling Christmas albums of all time. We all know the reason she makes it into the news every year is because All I Want for Christmas Is You, which is her hit song, became a classic staple of the holiday season. It has reached the top spot in charts all over the world almost every year since 1994 and continues to be one of the favorites. Gets used in movies and all over the place. Now, Mariah Carey, who is 53, has produced several other Christmas. Yeah, 53. I know. These kinds of things scare the hell out of me. Mariah's 53 years old. She has produced several other Christmas-related singles and regularly gives guest performances. Darlene Love is 81, and she recorded the song Christmas Baby Please Come Home in 1963. So she says, I've been there longer than Mariah Carey. I am the queen of Christmas.
Longer than Mariah's been alive.
No. So she uses as her as her authority on this. She says, David Letterman officially declared me Queen of Christmas 29 years ago, a year before she released All I Want for Christmas Is You. She added, at 81 years old, I ain't changing anything. I've been in the business for 52 years and have earned it and can still hit those notes. I wonder if that's a stab at Mariah, who we know doesn't even try for the high notes anymore. She just goes, and lets the audience do them. Anyway, Elizabeth Chan, who's the other one, so these three women all going for this title. She says, I am the queen of Christmas. She says, Christmas is for everyone, and I feel strongly no one person should hold on to anything around Christmas in the way that Mariah seeks to, in perpetuity, she said. That's not the right thing to do. Christmas is for everyone. It's meant to be shared. It's not meant to be owned. So, big fight between these three women.
I vote for the 81-year-old.
I think so too, just by
Always
virtue of the
age
fact
before beauty.
Right, she's been there the longest, right?
Yeah, always age before beauty. 81, that's who I vote for. Go Christmas.
Well, Boiled Prawn Shack says, I'm sorry, but Boney M are the royal family of Christmas. Mariah, what? That's true. Can't argue with that, right? That's true.
Let me just look at this. It's the 18th of August. Oh dear. And we're already talking about Christmas carols.
I know. That's going to happen before you even know it. And Jade Naidu wants to say, have we started defrosting Michael Bublé? I wonder what he will have to say about this. And then Steve E says, I still think Elton John is the real Christmas queen. See, there's a lot of... Yeah, Matthew says, I think Mary of Nazareth deserves a shout, because the whole giving birth to Jesus thing. It's a good point. Yeah. Listen, I don't disagree that Mariah has kind of become, in some ways, every Christmas, that's when she makes all of her money for the whole year. Mariah doesn't have to do anything except have All I Want for Christmas Is You, and she makes all her money. Right?
Except this year, I read a thing about her making more money in the lead up, because everybody always jokes about Mariah Carey making all this money over Christmas.
Yeah.
This year, I read something about her kind of, I don't know, she made some kind of comeback, and was the royalties that she brought in this year for all her other stuff seems kind of put into that space even before the Christmas rush.
Well, who knows? But I mean, she does make it. She makes a huge amount of money out of that song. That's no doubt, right?
Yeah, that's what that's what I need. A widget, something that'll just like keep churning money every year for no reason other than the fact that it's that time of the year. You should think about this. What can we do? What can we do? What can we make?
You remember
that can do that?
Hugh Grant in About a Boy? The whole character was based on this dude who wrote a jingle for like some kind of product. And he got paid so much money for writing that one jingle. That was all he had to do.
Mm-hmm. That's what we need, like something like that. Maybe
Absolutely.
something that we can
Let's
link to taxis. We should think
so
about this.
so here's something. Now Elon Musk has got to stop doing this. He's such a troll on social media. So he joked about buying Manchester United. He joked about it. He said it's a long running joke. He said he was kidding when he said he was going to buy English soccer club Man United. But their stock jumped more than 3% following his tweet. Trading volume for shares in the sports club skyrocketed to more than double their daily average. And that was all just because Elon Musk said this. He said, I'm thinking maybe I should buy Man United just to help them with their stock price. And then he said, no, it's a long-running joke on Twitter. I'm not buying any sports teams. And then by then, the damage was done. So it shows you, first of all, how powerful he is, that he can get the stock to jump by 3% in a joke. And it also shows you that he hasn't got enough to do with all of his different jobs, that he's still tweeting. I mean, I think he's just having fun here. He doesn't care anymore.
Yeah, well,
He's like,
this
he's
morning,
just playing.
this morning woke up a tweet by Elon Musk saying, motherhood is the best career or something like that. And I was just like,
Motherhood.
this guy, someone must take his phone. Someone must hide his phone.
Right. So,
Or at least make it like the president's phone where you can't really do much with it.
absolutely. Well, I don't know if Cyril knows how to use Twitter properly. Someone else does that for him, but it's better that way. Onkgopotse says Elon should joke about buying South Africa, then our stock price would rise. I think everybody knows that's bullshit. I think everybody gets that. All right, then, speaking of the president, Phumi, here's a headline that we need to pay attention to. According to Julius, the president has a case to answer, and various opposition parties have sought a motion of no confidence in Cyril, being led by the EFF in this case. The political parties, which include the EFF, UDM, COPE, PAC, and ACDP. Interesting. These are not the usual suspects. Yeah. Kenneth Meshwa is in there, the PAC, COPE. But is COPE still, please, someone answer me. Is it a thing? And who is the leader of COPE at the moment? And why do we keep on talking to them like they're a real party? Who's in charge of COPE? Is it Terra Lekota? Is it?
I think Musiwa Lekota is still the head over there after he wrestled it away from Bazima.
Oh, my God. Anyway, these parties have all said that they're going to table a motion of no confidence, and they're going to hold Cyril accountable for the Pala Pala farm scandal. You know what irritates me about this is that there's such a poverty mindset in these people who are so blown away by the money he kept in his sofa. On paper, Cyril's worth billions, and this 4 million is nothing to him. It's like if you and I leave 100 rand in our jackets, and then we don't put that jacket on for a couple of weeks, and then we put that jacket on and we find 100 rand and we go, oh, yay, extra 100 rand I didn't know I had. That's what it's like for Cyril. Now, I'm not defending him. I'm not News 24. Okay, and we know you and I are not. We have not given him an easy ride on this show. It seems to me like these little parties and these small-minded people who think that 4 million rand is a lot of money to Cyril. They just don't know what a lot of money is. And they're obsessed with this story because, to my mind, the biggest issue around Cyril is how he's mismanaged the ANC, how he's allowed a deterioration in the public service, how he was sitting there as the deputy during the Zuma years, and he seems to get a casual kind of acceptance from everybody. I don't think that this Pala Pala is a big deal. That's his money anyway. That's not is that the most controversial thing we could say about Cyril? What do you think?
Well, it's not. It's not the most controversial thing that we could say about Cyril. But it does do a number of different things for all of these individuals, right? So one, it's given the EFF its one trick back, because I guys years ago that they only have one trick, and their one trick was get Jacob Zuma out of there. Now it's given them another a new lease on their trick. Now they just get Cyril out of here, right?
Yes.
It's giving all of these people stuff to talk about and the wrong stuff to talk about. None of them are talking about what should be talked about. And what should be talked about is how do we move forward? How do we
Mm-hmm.
get to where we need to get to? But it's nice. You see, it's distracting to have all
Yeah.
of this.
Um,
Cyril
by
must
the way,
go.
yeah, and Carl says quite rightly, it's $4 million, not rands. But either way, Zuma was raping and pillaging, and they just left him. Again, $4 million even to Cyril is nothing. He's a billionaire. $4 million is pocket change to him. I promise you, this is not a big deal. And because they found it on his private property in his own furniture, it's a stupid place to store money. He obviously has too much money. But this is not the big. It's not the biggest story in the world. If Pala Pala is the reason that you're tabling emotion and no confidence, I'd be horrified to think about what else distracts you. And I think it's small-mindedness. I really do.
I, look, and of all the that could talking about pala pala,
Mm.
pala pala, pala pala, pala pala, all the things they could be speaking about. They're not even talking about the pertinent things, the questions that nobody is asking. Like,
Mm-hmm.
really, this money was in the sofa. We've
Yeah,
spoken about this. How
it's
was
done there.
this money in the sofa? Was it was it sewn into the cushion? And why was it sewn into the cushions? Where was this
Yeah.
money coming from or going to? What? I mean,
Uh-huh.
there's lots of things that they could be talking about that could give them a real leg to work with,
They're
but they're
not.
not.
No. So let's turn our attention further afield. In England and Britain more generally, inflation has surged to a new 40-year high. On rising food prices, official data showed on Wednesday that the cost of living crisis, that's what they're calling it, it's not a cost of living crisis, everybody. It is a cost of lockdown crisis. That is what this is. Don't be under any illusions. There hasn't been a sudden crisis in the cost of living. The reason that we've got a cost of living problem is because supply chains were disrupted, the economies of the world were put on hold. All of this is reaping the whirlwind of those 2.5 years where we were unable to normally transact, do normal business. Did you think that wasn't going to come with a cost? So they're calling it a cost of living crisis, but that's politics. They're trying to spin it. It's actually the cost of lockdown crisis. So the consumer price index accelerated to 10.1% last month from 9.4% in June. This is a 40-year record. The last time this happened was 40 years ago. The Bank of England warned that earlier this month, inflation would climb to just over 13% this year, which is the highest since 1980. 1980. That was like a year after Margaret Thatcher became prime minister. It is projected that the country will enter a recession that would last until late 2023. And the finance minister, Nadim Zahawi, said that I understand that times are tough. People are worried about increases in the prices that countries around the world are facing. Getting inflation under control is my top priority, he said, and we are taking action through strong independent monetary policy, responsible tax, and spending decisions. Well, someone should have thought of that during lockdowns. Do you agree with me, Phumi? That's what it is. We're now bearing the responsibility of some bad decisions that were made 2 years ago. That's all there is.
You know, just talking about inflation and the naming of things and whether
Mm.
it's the cost of living or cost of lockdown. Did you see, oh, young Joe Biden signed off his $430 billion climate, healthcare, and inflation?
Oh, no. But they're calling it the Inflation Reduction Act. And it does
But it's for
nothing.
everything.
It does nothing to reduce inflation. I mean, by definition, right? Inflation can only happen in one place. Remember, Thomas Friedman is one of the most famous economists of all time. He said there's only one institution that can create inflation, and that institution is the government because they can print currency. That is what inflation is. There's no other definition. So if you want to reduce inflation, stop printing money. So what does Joe Biden do? What does his government do after already pumping trillions, not billions, trillions of dollars into the economy, which is precisely why the whole world now is feeling the repercussions of that irresponsible fiscal policy. Now he thinks we're stupid enough to buy, because honestly, if this Biden regime has done anything, they have proven that they have no faith in the ordinary human being. They have no trust in us at all. They think we're all complete idiots, and they can sell us any kind of spin that they like. So he's called this the Inflation Reduction Act. But all it is even more spending, which means what? Means printing money, which means what? Means more inflation. There is nothing in this bill that reduces inflation. And you know what they did? They only said that. They only admitted that after they'd passed the bill.
But you know what
And then
I
he was
find?
going around. Then he's going around saying, this will finally give me the chance to deliver on the promises I made with regard to environmental policy. Well, no one elected you on environmental policy. And they've done polls in America in the last couple of weeks, which I would cite if they were here with me at the moment. But these are things that I've been paying attention to for weeks now. They've cited polls where the environment isn't even in the top 20 things that the average American is concerned about right now. They're worried about the cost of living. They're worried about the cost of food, the cost of petrol, the supply chain crisis. That's what people care about.
So here's the thing that I absolutely love about what this is, right? This bill in particular is it is an absolute demonstration of how politics works, and more importantly, how horse trading in politics works. Because the
Mm-hmm.
reason they allow it to be called the inflation bill is because it
Mm-hmm.
is what is top of mind for everybody is inflation,
Yep.
right? But actually, that's just the name of it. And underneath is all of this other stuff. It's climate, it's healthcare, it's a catch all for everything. But in order to get it passed, they just rebranded it an
Correct.
inflation bill. And now, of course, everybody signs it off and passes it through. And now it is signed into law.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
this for me is one of the things that our favorites here in the country are really failing to activate, as we
Who?
see all of the coalition politics in all of these, in Tswade, in KZN, in Ekuruleni, as we see all these, opposition politics play into each other, but also the coalitions kind of struggle to make things work. It's because the guys don't know how to horse trade and politic the way that they should be politicking to
Yeah, but
get things
also,
moving.
so in Tshwane, which is obviously it's my municipality, and I have been hopeful that they would be able to sort themselves out. There is a coalition which has been in place for a while now. I've seen that Herman Mashaba has just pulled out of that coalition, which is going to put my municipality back into disarray, where we're not going to have the right people running things, which they've been trying to run. I mean, under the DA and that DA coalition, they managed to not only wipe out all Tswane's debt because the municipality was in huge debt, they also managed to fix that billing crisis, which had been going on here, just like it has in Durban. And now, thanks to Herman Mashaba, it's all a disaster again. So if Herman Mashaba wants me to vote for Action SA, he better figure out how to do coalitions better. He better figure out that, to me, service delivery is more important than any of his other politics. And right now, I'm looking at Herman Mashaba in my own municipality when it comes to, our local elections. And I'm thinking, actually, he's disrupting. He's not helping. Why would I vote for him? So here are a list of America's top concerns. This is from the Statista Global Consumer Survey. This is the share of U.S. adults who say that the following are among the most important issues that need to be addressed in the U.S. The first and most important issue, 44.3% of people agree that in inflation and the cost of living is the number one thing. Second biggest is health and social security at 39.7%, still trailing quite a long way behind inflation. Then the economic situation, which you could also say is the same as the first issue, that's 39.7%. After that, at 36.2%, crime, then unemployment at 33%, then poverty at 32.4%, then education Only then does climate change come in. And climate change is ahead of immigration and housing. But those are the
Wow.
top issues for Americans right now, according to the latest surveys. So don't
They
tell
sound
me.
a lot like the top issues for South Africans.
They are. And this is the problem, right? I mean, all over the world, we are looking at these countries in Europe who are going to be facing their own energy crisis in the next while, who are going to probably have load shedding for the first time. We look at water issues in the UK at the moment. They're going to supposedly switch off my water from Friday until Tuesday, either for a short period or for a long period. I don't know. But I might have to come and shower at your house, Pums. But in Britain
Yay!
at the moment,
How, don't you have a
in
gym
Britain
membership?
at the moment, oh, I can go to the gym. That's right. But they probably won't have water either. So Britain at the moment is going through water rationing. So these are things that are happening all over the world now because politicians have mismanaged everything. It is politicians. They have made their local problems global problems. This is what globalism gets you. You want the good, but you don't want the bad. Sorry, that's not how it works. The globalists everywhere have made these problems our problems. They've found problems and spread them around the globe instead of finding solutions and spreading them around the globe. So here's a breakdown. 60 billion in that bill of Biden's is for environmental justice programs. Now, what the fuck is
What
environmental
is that?
justice? Exactly, it's spin, right? Either it's got to do with his equity policies, which are just pure
Do you think it's
socialism.
going to go into? Do you think it's going to go into NGOs that are going to come and tell Africans how
Yes,
they must
probably.
use cleaner energy?
Probably. They'll probably be
Probably
telling
going to
us
be NGOs.
yeah, probably. So that's outrageous. $60 billion for environmental justice. Now, I want to know how it is possible for congressmen and women of good conscience, if they are those kinds of people, to pass this kind of thing. I mean, we know that Joe Manchin, who was the senator from North Virginia, West Virginia, he is the he's the one who got he because he got some little piece of the pie for West Virginia. He went along with all this shit. He was standing against all of this for the longest time. 27 billion is for, listen to this, green banks. Now, what is that?
So
Green banks.
I just Googled what is environmental, and the very next word that comes up is justice.
Oh yeah. And what does it say?
So clearly everyone's Googling what is environmental justice.
Mm-hmm. What is it?
Department of Energy. Fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to, this is the Department of Energy in the States. Oh no, it's too long.
Bullshit.
There's,
Such bullshit.
it's too long. Implementation and enforcement of
Listen to this.
environmental laws,
You're gonna love this.
regulations, policies. Is a lot.
Listen to this, Pumi. $3 billion. Okay, $3 billion
How
is going
many?
to be $3 billion is going to be spent on green postal vehicles. The vehicles that deliver post. This is in the government, not DHL or FedEx or any of these courier companies who are already doing whatever they can to be ahead of the curve. For the U.S. Postal Service, a government department, to have cars that are electric, they're going to spend $3 billion. By the way, that electricity for your electric car, do you think that's coming from fresh air? Do you think it's all solar and wind? I got bad news for you. It isn't. And just to give you a little idea of how stupid this bill is, $7,500 each is a tax break that they will give to rich people who want to buy electric vehicles. Because this is not for poor people. No poor people in America are buying electric vehicles. None. So if you're rich and you're already buying a Tesla or one of the other electric vehicles, they will give you a $7,500 tax break as a part of this bill so that you can buy your electric vehicle, pat yourself on the back, do a little bit of virtue signaling, and tell everybody you're saving the environment at your cocktail party. It is outrageous that the Democrats have become a party that cares this little about ordinary people. Joe Biden should be ashamed of himself. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
It really is. And of course, when you give people a tax break of $7,500, you idiots, what do you think happens? Well, I'll tell you what happens. The manufacturers just increase their prices. That's all. They go, oh, well, government's putting $7,500 in for each car. We'll make them $7,500 more expensive. Ka-ching. Easy government money, right? So there we go. There's a little breakdown for you. I didn't think I'd go on a rant about Joe Biden for 5 minutes, but you could see how stupid this is, right? Stupid, stupid, stupid. Put more money into the economy. That's not inflation. No. What happens when you put more of something into a closed system? Then the price, the value of that something becomes less. I'm not even an economist and I can understand this. Has nobody in the White House got more than 3 brain cells to rub together? Unbelievable. And I know it's not
a humanities graduate.
Exactly. But it's not Joe Biden, because Joe Biden he doesn't know whether he's coming or going, whether he's a teapot or a hockey stick. He thinks he's at Disneyland. So it's got to be someone else there that's as stupid as that. Anyway, let's leave it alone. There's some info for you, a couple of headlines. When we come back in the next hour, it is the Burning Platform. I'm thrilled that we will have 2 and a whole lot more. Stick around. CliffCentral.com. Don't go anywhere.
Up next in the Auto Trader podcast.
You must be at least a minimum age, and usually it's around 23, even in South Africa. So I didn't know that the first time I went to try and hire a car that's something that they consider.
Well, it's down to risk, I guess.
It is, yeah.
So companies can put whatever rules they want in place. So different car companies can have different ages. They can say you have to be 30 to hire a car from us. So it's not a law. It's a car hire company rule. So 23 or older, it's probably they've taken it from each other and applied it. I don't think it's not a legal thing.
Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
All right, all right, all right. It is a Thursday morning, which means we get to do the Burn platform. It's your chance to catch up on all of the things that are going on in the news, all of the stuff that we are most affected by, and the things that we want to try and unpack and understand. And in South Africa, that can be, in some situations, very complicated. In other situations, very, very easy. Of course, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Phumi Mashiko. And Pums, we're going to talk about something that I think everybody wants to get into this morning. Something that's really, it's been there the whole time, but it's raised its ugly head in a very, very dramatic way in the last couple of weeks. And we hope that it's not a trend. We hope that this is something which will go away. But we've got to talk about security. We've got to talk about tavern shootings. We've got to talk about guns. And I know this is also stuff that's come up a few times on the show. We have two experts at hand to be able to help us get into some of this, both of whom have been on the show before. And I'm thrilled to welcome them back. First, Gideon Joubert, who is an independent security consultant. He's also an advanced level firearm instructor. He's written several published articles about responsible and lawful firearm use in South Africa over the past 10 years. Gideon, nice to see you.
Gareth and Phumi, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure being here. Looking forward to it.
No problem at all. Always good to have you in, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. We also have Dr. Gerard Labuschagne, who is a clinical psychologist. He's also a criminologist and an advocate at the High Court with an interest in particular, forensic and investigative psychology. He's worked in the South African Police Service section head for the investigative psychology section and was the head profiler for the police for a very, very long time. He took over from the legendary Mickey Pistorius. It's great to have you on too. Thank you, Gerard, for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Right. So where shall we begin? I mentioned to Phumi earlier that we certainly hope it's not a trend, but in the last while we've seen an outbreak of these tavern shootings, and it seems to not be random, and it seems to not be something that we can just, gloss over. If it was the headline news story in any other country, it would have stayed in the headlines for a very long time. It's just South Africa where we have an orgy of violence around us, and also where certain lives seem to be more important than other lives. If it was the Riva Steenkamp story, for example, just to say, the most famous murder in the last however many years, then I suppose it would still be everybody's focal point. But because these were unnamed, unknown people in a tavern in a poor neighborhood in the Eastern Cape, people are like, this is what happens in South Africa. It's an outrageous point of view. It's an outrageous opinion for so many people. Even if they hold it without directly saying so.
Gareth, maybe then the right question to start with is this something that happens in taverns in South Africa regularly and we just never hear about it? Is this really a thing?
Well, gentlemen, would you like to have a go at that? And maybe you can correct my question where I may be wrong, and also take up Phumi on her question, which is a very good one. Like, is this something that happens all the time in South Africa? Gerard, you would know something about this.
Yeah, so I would like to say mass shootings is not something that, as far as I know, we sort of have on a regular basis. I do think that they would get into the media's attention, like the very first one. Obviously, the subsequent ones are building upon the previous ones in this time period when we had this bunch of them taking place. And I just think in terms of my own experience in the police, our mass violence incidents were not regular occurrences. Sort of we had in 1999 at Tempe military base, there was a shooting where one of the employees, who was a lieutenant, went on a sort of rampage and I think shot 5 people, killed 6 others. And that was sort of your typical workplace violence, almost like your a la American sort of type of mass shootings. And then we had the Sizzlers case a couple of years ago, which was a robbery that went very wrong, where they ended up shooting the people who were inside the massage parlor. Then we had Rosebank police station a couple of years ago where recently dismissed admin clerk, who was also apparently in charge of the firearms store, managed to get hold of a firearm and go shoot the HR captain who oversaw his dismissal and killed her, and then shot the station commissioner, and she survived before a member of the one of the captains entered the room and the person took his own life. So you have these from time to time. So I do think that they would have been getting into the media if we were having them. So I think, Phumi, your question is relevant. Was it only just because the media just had a slow day and they decided to focus on them? But I do think we would have been hearing about mass shootings if they've been happening sporadically or sort of fairly regularly. I agree with you, Gareth, that we have an interesting tolerance for violence. We get very morally outraged at something, and a week later we're back to normal. And I think, like you say, it's because we have violence fatigue, and because we also know perhaps that nothing really changes. So we get upset and then we move on, because you're just going to drain yourself if you try to keep the momentum going for all of these massive amounts of issues that we have in our country when it comes to crime and violence.
Well, I was talking to Professor Chris Szabo yesterday, who is a psychiatrist and a well-known expert on these things, and we were talking about the next season of Beyond Madness and what kinds of subject matter he wants to delve into. And he brought up compassion fatigue, and I think violence fatigue is linked to that. In South Africa, for the average South African, there's just such a lot of this stuff going on all over the place that we've almost become numb to it, and maybe it takes these extraordinary cases like the tavern incident in the Eastern Cape for people to go, oh my God, this shouldn't be normal. But even from the cases that you've cited there, and there were some that I'd vaguely remembered and some that I'd forgotten, it still doesn't sound like this is the norm. It still doesn't sound that this is unusual and extraordinary, and probably should be treated as such. We have seen some others happen as a result of that. Do you think there's any degree, just so we can say we've covered this ground, of copycat stuff going on there? Or do you think that they're unrelated?
Look, with these American-style ones, do you see where you have this disgruntled human being who feels that life has turned against them, they've been sort of pushed aside. There you do often see that where you have one, within a week you tend to have another one. Now, that was probably more a person who had this in the back of his mind and wanted to do it, and is almost given that sort of final go-ahead by someone else doing it. I don't think it's going to start someone from scratch deciding, hey, let me just go and do this. So there has to be that tendency line in wait, so to speak. One happens, and almost that gives that person the motivation to do his. The ones here in South Africa really don't seem to be like that psychologically motivated. These seem to be more general crime motivated, whether it's competing factions in a particular industry or area, because the ones in America typically end in a very different way than we saw here. Here we have these guys fleeing the scene. It's multiple offenders, it seems, in most instances, where these psychological ones tend to be the lone wolf or lone actor type of offense. So I think these are what we're seeing as more in the realm of the crime sort of related to criminal activities. As I said, factions, organized crime, whatever term you want to give it. So I don't think in that case, it is weird. I mean, just to have so many in a short period of time, statistically, it's just an anomaly. And I think, as you say, we do need to look at if there are links between these. And as far as I can tell from my colleagues in the police, they have looked into that, and they don't seem to be, and unless something in the past 10 days, because I was overseas, has come up. So these, it is weird that they're happening, sort of a bunch of them in one go, but they do apparently seem to be not related to each other. Whether one inspired another one, like I said, I think you would have already had to have had the inclination and the idea in your head before you go and do something like this anyway. I don't think somebody from scratch is going to be inspired, suddenly have a grievance, suddenly think this is the best way to deal with it, etc., and go out and do it.
I think one of the things that it has brought into the sharp reality for most of us South Africans is the level of breakdown in the police force. So the capacity in the police force to deal with these types of things and just general lawlessness, as because that's what also happens, right? Is you push the boundaries, the first group of people push it to this, and then kind of goes, oh, it's easy, you can try it out, you can do it. Is this also what we're seeing, kind of this breakdown in the police force, and what's being done, I suppose, to reinforce or to build up again the capacity in these forces?
Yeah. Look, definitely, if people, you can have the most amazing laws, you can have, a minimum sentences act, which gives life for this type of offense and X amount for that type of offense. So, and we do have pretty good laws, I must say. Our laws are very well written, I think. But the problem is if people don't think they're actually going to get caught and actually going to get prosecuted and convicted and sentenced, then, that almost creates a space where it doesn't matter whether you've got the death sentence or not, for example. If they don't think they're going to get caught and punished, there's no incentive not to do it. So the less faith we have in the police, the easier it is for people to naturally start to push the boundaries of behavior, which of course includes criminal behavior also. So yes, I don't think bad policing causes crime, but I do definitely think if you don't have good policing, it's almost as if the brakes are off. There are other factors that are going to be the momentum that gets the bus rolling, like, poverty, et cetera, inequality. But, the police are almost like the brakes that are there to keep that bus from getting out of control. And unfortunately, our police service is just, it's in a downward spiral that I really don't think we're going to recover from, and I'm not typically a pessimistic person, but I just don't see from the top down to the bottom that any of the right decisions are being made. I think any of us dreads having to go to a police station, even to get an affidavit signed, commissioned. Yeah. I dread it, and I'm an ex-brigadier in the police. It's just, that's a very sad scenario.
That's terrible. Gideon, I'm going to bring you in here. So first of all, comments from you on the tavern shootings, and then a comment on the police before we move on to some other specifics.
I'm going to do my best not to cover ground we already have, because I think Dr. Labuschagne's commentary was quite extensive. I think when you look at tavern shootings like this, and you can see certain similarities to what's happening with taxi violence in KZN, you can draw certain parallels to gang violence on the flats, for the simple reason that in the one where the Zamazamas are definitely involved, because there have been several tavern shootings. You can see I'm quoting Mark Shaw here. He was the author of a very good book called Give Us More Guns, that really detail how state-issued firearms ended up in the hands of gangsters and criminals. He referred to these as mafia-style attacks, in the sense that they are, copycat from what the mob in the US used in order to facilitate economic gain for these various criminal groups, in order or through a application of violence in order to cause harm to their direct or indirect competitors. Well, when we saw the one tavern shooting involved an off-duty Metro Police officer, I started getting a little bit suspicious, for the simple reason, and this is quite a tragic thing to say, the degree of criminal infiltration into the SAPS itself. And it's not just a problem that affects the police service. When you look at the taxi violence situation in KZN, where you have taxi bosses that actually own their own security companies, and somehow that goes beyond my well, not really beyond my understanding, but that beggars belief. These security companies end up licensing Section 20 firearms completely fraudulently, because firstly, half of them are not even zero registered. Therefore, there's no way in heck that they have actual SAPS accreditation, which is what they would need as a security company to even license those guns. And then you hear shocking reports of that they're getting licenses issued in the space of 2 days, where an ordinary security company waits up to a year or longer. So there's definitely, when you look at the relationships between criminal organizations, the politicians who benefit from their activities, plus give them protection, who can be quite high-ranking in many instances, plus high-ranking police officers are also involved in it, you start developing a picture of not as much dysfunction, but a true sort of gangster state operation. And I know not very long ago we had a mass shooting in Khayelitsha. I suspect that one was taxi related, but there's also been a bit of a ramp up, if I'm anecdotally remembering correctly, of political violence in KZN, where there are more and more councillors being shot at if they're not being outright assassinated. I think in a way, these events are not necessarily directly connected, but they're all part of the same ecosystem of violence. With the police itself, what's concerning for me is numerous things. I mean, apart from the fact that the former National Commissioner admitted to Parliament in 2018, I think, that the SAPS is overstretched and that it's impossible for the service to fulfill its constitutional mandate. Apart from all the broken blue line reports that have been written on it by the RR that sort of detail the extent of criminal infiltration in the SAPS, there's one number that keeps jumping out at me, and it's when you look at the civilian ratio, or police to civilian ratio in SA. We have about so it's supposed to be, according to, I think there's some form of United Nations standard, that's one police officer per every roughly 350 members of the public. If I go and look at the figures of the amount of SAPS officers that are performing visible policing duties, those are the cops that you and I will interact with on a daily basis, there's roughly 24,400 visible members on shift on a daily basis if you work in you need to take the total number and divide it by 4 because it's a 4-shift rotational basis, and then factor in about a 20% figure for those that are on leave, they're on course, they're off sick. You only have about 19,500 SAPS officers in uniform doing visible duties per shift at any given time in this country, which is 1 police officer roughly per every 3,077 citizens, which is a ratio that is 10 times worse than the minimum recommended one. That is kind of where we're sitting with the situation.
Jeez, what do you say to this, Gideon, while you're on about the police? Rusty says he was listening to Big Daddy, Sihle Ngobese, and Sihle was saying that there are over 4,000 SAPS members who have criminal records. Does that sound right to you, or does that sound like a made-up figure?
I saw a figure a while back, and maybe Dr. Labuschagne can correct me. I remember that it was a bit higher than that. But what is concerning about this is that, firstly, this number is known, it is detected, and there seems to have been a repeated failure of addressing it within the ranks, because this is not a new story. I think the first time we read about it was almost 10 years ago, about SAPS members with criminal records, some of them holding fairly high-ranking positions, and equally some of them even being deemed competent to carry firearms, although that's a separate discussion altogether.
Sure. Well, do you have any follow up on that information there, Gerard? And then Pums and I have some other questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any specific stats, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if those were accurate figures at all, unfortunately. I remember in the past when I was in the police, there was concerns about people, serving SAPS members having criminal records. So it's a long-standing issue, I think, as Gideon pointed out. And yeah, those stats wouldn't surprise me at all, to be honest with you.
Sure.
Pums, sorry.
So Gideon, you talk about kind of the private security business and then the rise thereof, because almost like everything else in South Africa, there's private sector have stepped in where there has been government kind of wholesale government failure. And a couple of weeks ago, I think there was much shock and outrage kind of reverbing through the news cycle when Investec in London decided that they're going to be giving their top executives an additional, I think, 2 million rand stipend for personal security. Also as a safeguard because of the criminality and how crime has risen, and in particular in South Africa. I'm quite interested to know your view and your experience with regards to that. Is this a growing part of security systems in South Africa? And how are we dealing with these kidnappings? There was a very big story a couple of weeks ago with those Moti boys. And then nothing ever since. Is it a problem? Is it something people should be worried about, especially like rich people?
There certainly is something that is a concern, and there has been a rather extensive increase in the amount of, or the number of kidnappings, especially from Q1 last year to the current one. I do not have the statistics quite on hand, but it was a massive increase, I think close to 100%, if I recall the figure correctly, which is humongous. Kidnapping is a major problem. It was already a slightly problematic statistic, and it has been rising. It hasn't gotten an extensive amount of media coverage, unless, as you mentioned, it's a couple of high-profile cases. And the close protection service, as rendered by private security companies in South Africa, is, especially to high net worth individuals, has always been a healthy industry. But I think in people like Investec, or corporates like Investec, who are concerned about their more high-level executives and their safety in South Africa, with specific reference to the risk of being kidnapped, I don't think that's them being unrealistic or hysterical or at all. I think that's a very, very good decision pertaining to managing that risk as best as possible. And unfortunately, it is a reflection on the overall state of the South African crime milieu and ambience and what we're dealing with on a daily basis. I think we mustn't forget that we are, unfortunately, one of the most violent countries on earth. That doesn't mean the problem isn't fixable. It doesn't mean there are some very good solutions, but that is the reality that we currently find ourselves in.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Private security, though, on the up everywhere. I mean, I was talking to someone just the other day, and they said that they take their kid to school, one of the schools, and some of the parents send their kids to school with security guards who see them in and then drive away afterwards and collect them in the afternoons. I mean, these are just kids at schools, for heaven's sake. So it's happening in South Africa. I always thought this was the province of, kind of South American
Man on fire.
Yeah. But particularly those South Americans who are always worried about some cartel, grabbing their kid and then holding them for ransom. It's not something that you thought would be happening on our own doorstep. Do you have any comments on that, Gerard?
Yeah, I mean, look, we definitely saw there's always been kidnappings in South Africa, kidnappings for extortion. I mean, just one always has to be careful with the stats, because the definition of kidnapping legally is depriving someone of their freedom. So if you lock them in a room, that's technically kidnapping. So, when we look at the raw figures, it gives a very, people start to think, oh, wow, that's the number of kidnappings for ransom. But definitely from about 2016, we saw the high net value kind of kidnappings where people are being kidnapped for 40, 50 million rand ransoms, specifically amongst the Muslim community in South Africa. I think Omar Karim was the first big one. And it was really the sort of gangs that were operating in Mozambique and other parts of Southern Africa that just felt, obviously, South Africa is ripe for this type of crime. And they've been massively successful, because in terms of these big high-profile kidnappings, Gerard's got 2, I think also in 2016, 2017, if I recall correctly, and numerous ones. These guys have been very successful. They make a lot of money off of doing this. And the police are not catching these people. I mean, in these big high-profile cases, there's been almost no arrests. You hear every now and then 1 or 2 arrests, but not in these sort of kidnap cartels. And I mean, these have international links. They have the best cybersecurity. They're probably not ever going to catch these guys because they're far better resourced than the police are, and they're using the technology to their benefit. And as I said, they're making fortunes. So I think we've also seen some of the cash and transit crowd who are starting to dabble in this particular industry because it's a lot less risk. Planning, yes, but it's a lot less risk and big payoffs. And my big fear is that you get the sort of the fly-by-night ones. I think always better if you're kidnapped by a professional crowd, because you will get released. You will, someone will pay money, you'll get released, and you'll be relatively well looked after. But if you're kidnapped by these chancers who think they're going to have a try at this kind of industry, those are the ones that I've been far more worried about in terms of your safety. And we saw that in the Eastern Cape, where a lot of sort of small business Pakistani nationals were getting kidnapped for smaller amounts with a drop-off, literally the bag being dropped off here, that kind of a place. And those are the ones, as I said, that are very worrying if I was the victim compared to the high-profile ones. But, I mean, we had yesterday, we had the Moti children, which was an unusual one. The typical kidnappings of kids in South Africa tend to be more in terms of custody issues and drug debt. But the sort of Moti kids is the Moti children. That's more like these big high-profile ones. But we saw yesterday, I think in Kensington and Cape Town, or the day before yesterday, where a young boy was kidnapped, and it's also looking like it's one of these high-value kidnappings. They tend to target more the corporate figures, and they target more the sort of wealthy business families that they perceive to have a lot of money that they can materialize without having to go through the hoops. I mean, if you kidnap the CEO of ABSA, ABSA's not going to pay that money. They might have ransom insurance, but it's more difficult to get that money out of ABSA than it is to get it out of a Moti family, for example.
Yeah. Wow, Phumi, I mean, your and my eyes just popped out of our heads with all of this.
I mean, there are 3 things that jump out at me on that. 50 million for ransoms. That's like that kind of. It's mind-boggling for me. That's like sofa money, That's like Cyril's sofa money. It's not just.
It's real money. Yeah.
But I'm also interested, and the second thing is around the Mozambique, and I mean we now know that Mozambique has basically become a narco state, right? And the easiness with which that kind of that enterprise, as you called it, has traveled across the border to us, and the level of sophistication employed. It's like international networks. Yeah. So how do we fix it?
Yeah. Oh, well, you have to improve your police. You have to, I mean, even till today, the police they call it a kidnapping task team that they put together, but it's about, I think as far as I know, 4 or 5 people. They don't get involved in all these cases. How much interaction they're having with their overseas colleagues who are dealing with these, technology-wise, whether they've got the right number of people on board, I don't know. And then we also saw one of the people in this sort of national kidnapping task team was arrested for trying to extort money out of one of the victims' families. It's just kind of bizarre. So the solution, I don't know. I mean, obviously these groups felt it's time and it's ready, and they've set up whatever structures inside the police system, and it's time to do this. And they've been very successful. I mean, again, rumors of policemen who are involved at least in the sort of snatching part of the victim, and then it's typically the victim's handed over to a separate group whose job it is to look after. And the person you're talking to when you negotiate is probably sitting in a foreign country, and your money is going to be sent off to a different country. So it's such a massive web that even if you catch the people who kidnapped the person or the people who are holding the person, that's just one part of this process. You know, you're not getting the guys who are sitting in, for example, Pakistan, masterminding all of this.
Let me ask both of you a fairly general question, but it is something that I think a lot of people jump to. Now, you mentioned Mozambique, and instantly I started thinking, because there are a lot of local criminals who like to blame foreign nationals, and there are a lot of foreign nationals who say, no, we're getting the blame from local criminals. What do you think the ratio is there? And I mean, this is a thumbsuck for either of you. There's no way we can actually figure out precisely where this is. But does it require a kind of international level a criminal operation, or are there sophisticated enough levels of criminal operation in South Africa for us to pull this off without having to bring in, you know, people from Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Pakistan, God knows where else?
Look, I do think you get your local crowd. I think it's a very convenient thing to blame it all on foreigners. It also absolves us of having to accept some responsibility. No, it's our own people and it's our own circumstances that are leading to this. But I think if you probably took a survey of people sitting in prison, I'd probably say off the top of my head, the overwhelming majority of South Africans. If I look at the cases I worked on in the police, you know, good old-fashioned South Africans committing these crimes. Of course you get foreigners, as you do with any country. But I think, you know, until somebody drops some stats in front of me that are done by a reputable organization, you know, I'm not going to go around blaming foreigners for what's the crime that's taking place in our country.
And what is South African police's capability or kind of working with international organizations, you know, international police organizations as well? Because this is what it sounds like, right? So if the criminals are multinational, there needs to be some kind of multinational capability, even in the police force, in order to be able to do something. Otherwise, we're just sitting ducks. Do we have that capacity?
And didn't Jackie Selebi ruin that for us as well? I mean,
I wasn't going to talk about Jackie Selebi that day. I was like biting my tongue about Jackie Selebi. He's the one that started this entire floodgate.
Look, I think the structures are there for us to liaise with foreign law enforcement. I mean, at the American Embassy, you'll have representatives of the FBI, DEA, all these agencies who are there to assist, you know, where possible. And I do recall some of the cases that I worked on when I was still in the police as a hostage negotiator. There was interaction, case by case. But I don't know if there's really on a meta level this, let's get together people and see how we can resolve, you know, these types of, you know, working together on a permanent basis as opposed to a case-by-case basis. And I think that's, for me, what starts to have happening. We need to be liaising almost on these international anti-kidnapping task teams. And not today we have a case that maybe there's a link to this country. Let's start to speak to that country and ask, hey, we've got this case, can you assist? We almost need to have structures set up in place and also sharing with what's happening in that country. Maybe we can pick up trends earlier that we can counteract. And I don't see that happening. Why? I don't know. But I think the potential is there for them to do it. It's not like it's an impossible process to start getting going. And I've always found foreign law enforcement quite happy to you know, respond and assist. Just people have to get off their backsides and start to initiate it.
So let's go where we also love to go whenever Gideon's on the show. It's always useful for us to talk about firearms and legal firearm ownership in South Africa. And I know, Phumi, you got into a quite heated argument not so long ago with Mighty Jamie about precisely this. You know, we can't clearly, based on just the discussion we've had this morning, let alone all the other associated discussions you can have with people's own experience out there with police, you can't really rely on the cops in a situation of life and death. It's probably better to have a gun and not need one than to need a gun and not have one in a country like South Africa. I think, politically and ideologically, there are people who are very much against guns. Politically and ideologically, there are people who are very much for them. I don't want to get into that debate, but how are we doing, Gideon, in terms of the latest developments in firearms control? I know that there was an important case that was won by Martin Hood and others at the SCA recently. What's the current status quo for legal, lawful firearm owners? And have you got any updates for us from the last time we spoke about this in a much more general sense?
So with regards to the big bill, that was the proposed amendment last year that was originated from the Civilian Secretariat. That one has still been sort of placed on the back burner by the Portfolio Committee, the Police Portfolio Committee, that deprioritized it, as such in their words, simply because of several factors. One of the major being that there was a humongous public outcry against the contents. I mean, the idea of banning the ownership of firearms in South Africa for purposes of self-defense. And then you had chaps like Becky Taylor and Jeremy Very come out and say, no, there's no good reason to own guns in this country for self-defense. Very himself going to court to try and get his close protection detail back after it was removed with his dismissal, and Taylor going everywhere with an entire sort of squad of NIU or TRT protection officers. It's just a ridiculous pantomime. So that got that got killed temporarily. It probably will be back, and we'll have to have another shot at bashing it into submission. But I think with the complete disarray Parliament is in right now, and the fact that after the December elective conference, the ANC, who really the only party who's really keen on pushing this, will probably be getting their house in order for the next election. So we may have quite a bit of breathing space on it. The other thing that's I think important for people to know is that one of the major reason that's put forward for the banning of civilian guns is because allegedly civilian guns end up in the hands of criminals, and that's where the major source. Again, I'm referring to Mark Shaw in his book. He debunks that solidly for several reasons. The one is Colonel Chris Prinsloo by himself, just him alone, this excludes everyone else that was involved in that racket and still are involved in the racket, sold 9,000 state-issue guns to criminals by himself. The other thing is that the firearm loss statistics that the SAPS publish every year is wholly inaccurate. They only publish their service weapon losses that are lost off the individual officers, either stolen or they lose them or there's something else that happens. The amount of losses that occur out of the SAP 13 evidence stores, which includes decommissioned, or rather SAPS firearms that are in the process of being decommissioned. They get booked out of the armory into the SAP 13. There are no figures on the annual losses out of those stores available at all. When there was a PIRE request sent in, 2 of them, for those figures to be made public, they were refused twice. The first answer was that no, the general public won't be able to understand the complexity of the figures, which that's a wonderful thing to say.
Like the police one.
Exactly. The second one was a bit more illuminating in the sense that they said, we do not have the figures handy, and it is impossible to generate them because it would require a national audit of every SAP 13 locker, its contents, and all its registries, so that they have absolutely no idea at station level, by the way, what the loss figure or the loss rate is. So it's now a kind of well and generally accepted fact that the losses out of where the criminals get their state-issue guns from are usually from SAP 13 lockers. We have no idea what the loss rate out of those are. So that, to me, kind of kills that argument of the so-called leak.
But I love the way that the police, who can't seemingly keep their own weapons and look after their own weapons and stop criminals from getting their hands on them, they want to blame the public for the rare occasions when our firearms are stolen, usually violently. Yeah. And usually when someone is killed, it's just outrageous, actually. Yeah. And then to turn that on us and say, you guys are the source of all of these unlicensed weapons that are being carried around by gangsters and thugs. Yeah. Please do me a favor.
And I mean, the irony of it is, it's kind of like saying we can't combat housebreakings. And in housebreakings, they steal people's TVs. So we're going to ban you guys from owning TVs, and then we won't have TV theft. It's like you're blaming us for your failures. or like
Right.
cars get hijacked. So everybody, public transport from now on, hey, we've solved we're paying for their mistakes. I mean, and just to carry on what Gideon was saying, the Wits School of Governance report, which was, if I'm not mistaken, commissioned by the police to look into firearm violence, which the police refused to release for years. And they were quoting that when they referred to the bill that Gideon mentioned just now to make these changes. And when finally we managed to get that, not we, me, but it was managed to get that report released, we realized, A, they actually either can't read a report or they were intentionally misquoting it, because what they were using to justify these changes in the Act actually was not what their very own report said. And the very own report said that the biggest loser of firearms is the government, not private individuals. So again, blaming the private individuals for the gun crime that's taking place in the country. And that report actually said that when there was dips in crime, gun violence in South Africa, it wasn't because the 2004 Firearms Control Act was implemented. It wasn't because of amnesties. It was because of more active policing and better policing that led to a decrease in firearms crime. And firearms activists love to sort of say, yeah, but we know after that was implemented, we had a decrease. But we had a decrease in murder rates with firearms for years prior to the point of that Firearms Control Act. So they like to kind of define the decrease as the date that act was implemented, not saying, but let's look at the rate for a couple of years prior to it. And of course, we've had a consistent increase in murder rates, for the past 10 years. So, it's about better policing. I'm not saying we shouldn't have firearms. I mean, I'm an avid firearms owner, and I say, yes, I don't want, a lot of people shouldn't probably have firearms because they're not responsible enough.
Sure.
But,
I think,
control, yes, but better policing. Otherwise, this just going to escalate.
I mean, the issue of better policing, there's no way that anybody can be against that. I mean, very famously, Rudy Giuliani's solving the crime issue in New York was also about better policing and kind of policing the small, visible crimes and more police being in the place. But I'm also very interested in kind of the issues of personal safety and what individuals, with or without a firearm, what it is that we as individuals need to be more aware of, right? So that we are safer, in the absence of better policing, in the absence of how do I, as an individual, kind of be more aware of myself and my surroundings so that I am a safer individual, and how to respond to environments like that. Do
Well,
any of you have?
you've come to the right place, Phumi. These two are probably the best people to help us address that. We'll start with you, Gideon, because you actually do consulting in this realm as well. Where do you think people have these blind spots where they end up becoming victims?
I'm so glad, Phumi, you asked this question. And you actually kind of already answered it in your question, is that your first and most effective defense mechanism is situational awareness. And that is essentially your understanding and awareness of where you are, where you're busy going, and what is going on around you. And the biggest blind spot is actually the most simple and stupid one you can imagine. And it's the fact that people leave their homes. They are no longer in a safe, controlled environment the moment you leave your house. That's why a great number, I think that the majority of hijackings occur in people's driveways just before they get home, because they are at their lowest level of alertness in that space, even though they're still out in public. People get sucked into their phones. The next time you stop at a red robot or at a stop street, just take a look around you as to what people in their vehicles are busy doing. They get sucked into these little screens in front of them about, this far in front of their face, and they lose all awareness, as in no peripheral, nothing. And then you wonder why smash and grab attacks happen the way they do, why there's, or how people get mugged as part of street crime. So your situational awareness is, above all else, your single most important defensive tool. I think a guy called Kelly McCann, who wrote a series of really good books on combatives for street survival, and I enjoy his philosophies. He says your first rule of combatives is to avoid offensively. That means you almost in an aggressive manner avoid situations that you deem to be dangerous or undesirable. And if you can't avoid them, you evade them. That is, attempt to escape. And the third then element is, if you cannot do either of those two things, then you fight, and you have to fight with everything you have in you to prevail. And that is an element of mindset. We call a combative mindset is you are willing to do whatever it takes to win. The second part of that is you need to have a developed skill set to some degree. There's a lot of misconceptions about how skilled you have to be in order to effectively defend yourself. The average suburban housewife, the average sort of overweight middle-aged dad with a toddler, these are all people that can be readily and without extensive amounts of time and effort be taught to a level of proficiency where they can effectively defend themselves against the criminal if they have to. And then the third element that makes all that a lot easier than doing it with your empty hands is the toolkit or the tools you use, whether that is a baton, whether that's pepper spray, whether that's a firearm. I think we when we talk personal safety, we really do overemphasize the firearm as the tool. I don't think that means we mustn't go the other way and think that guns aren't important. They certainly are, but there's so much more to them. They're just one element to your personal safety toolbox. And just because you don't have a gun, for example, doesn't mean you can already not take, there's significant steps you can take to already make yourself a lot safer than you already are.
Gerard, do you want to add to that? Because I think what Gideon has just said is so valuable. The fact that ordinary people, you don't have to be, trained like you see these paramilitary officers in movies. You don't have to be someone who goes and shoots at the range every single day. You don't have to be one of these people who have martial arts skills up the wazoo. You just have to be paying attention and learn a few basic skills. In your experience, and also because you're a forensic guy, and you're a psychologist. I mean, where do you think we miss the boat sometimes in South Africa? And how come so many people fall victim to stuff where if they were just paying attention, they'd get away with a lot more?
No, I think Gideon started off with the most important one, that is a situational awareness. I mean, you can be a special forces ninja, but if you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, you can end up with a gun against your head, and then you're not going to fight. You're going to just hand over what they want or get shot. So I think that's the most important thing, being aware. I always say criminals, no matter whether you're a rapist or a housebreaker or hijacker, vehicle hijacker, you want to choose the softest and easiest target to achieve your goals. So and if you translate that into your house, I mean, a person's going to walk around looking for a house to rob. He's going to look at obviously an area where he thinks people have stuff, and then look at the house that has the least amount of security. So it is about target hardening, if you want to call it that, to your physical environment. But again, paying attention to what's going on around you. They don't want to go for someone who it appears is paying attention, is going to see them before them as they approach, etc. I mean, just on a simple level for myself, I mean, I never drive into my parking space at home frontwards. I always reverse in because that gives me the best field of vision, left, right, and in front, literally up until I'm inside my garage. And even then I can see if somebody's coming from the outside in, and I can decide what I want to do, stand my car on to drive and drive forward or whatever the case may be. But, if you're going forward in, and especially as Gideon said, as you're on your phone, if that guy was waiting for someone to drive into the driveway, you're the perfect target for them, no matter what your background, no matter whether you have a firearm or not. So target hardening to make it look like your house is the least attractive. Now, the sad thing is this doesn't stop crime. It just displaces it to the next person. But, that this is what we can do on our own level to try and prevent us becoming victims.
Yeah, I think that's useful information. I mean, just simple things like, as you say, reversing into your driveway rather than going in forward. And then obviously that also makes leaving the next morning that much easier because you're driving out with this field of vision rather than having to look backwards to see what's happening.
Absolutely.
Makes a lot of sense. Little thing, and yet so helpful and so useful. Are you an advocate for firearms ownership, or do you think that in South Africa there are a lot of people who should not have firearms? Gerard?
Look, I think a lot of people in the world that shouldn't have them. The Oscar Pistoriuses who are irresponsible with their handling of firearms and shoots through the sunroof and, behaves as if he's a cowboy trying to show off and having a look at someone's gun in the middle of a busy restaurant. I mean, that is like the most irresponsible thing you can do. So I think, and I like the fact that our Firearms Control Act has this whole issue of a competency certificate where you've got to go for some basic training. You've got to know how to dismantle your firearm, put it together and shoot straight and know the law. I mean, that's the most important thing. Well, as important as knowing what the law says about the handling of your firearm. So I think it should be a situation that we should have the right that if we want one, we are able, if we qualify, to get one. And it's this, like Gideon said, this idiocy of saying, the new proposed part of the bill is that you shouldn't be able to have a firearm for self-defense because we're going to protect you. It's, well, you can't protect us, firstly. And the response time, I think, for 910 111 is, last time I checked, 45 minutes. If you're in the Eastern Cape, it's 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
If I would say, get the crime down to an internationally acceptable level, then come back to me and say, we've done it. You don't need to own a firearm for self-defense. And I would say happily, sure, maybe for sports, collecting, but for self-defense, you've proved that we live in an absolutely safe society, then I don't need it for that purpose. If I live in the UK or in Finland or Denmark, I sure as hell wouldn't probably feel the need to have a firearm back home for that purpose. But sports
In the UK, you might just need a knife.
Yeah, but even then, carrying a knife is illegal. For the average civilian, you're not allowed to carry a knife in the UK in your pocket. So I think yes, I think we should have the right to have them, whether it's for sports, collecting, self-defense, as long as you qualify and obey the law. And if you don't, you must be punished for that. But changing the firearms laws tend to just punish honest civilians, because criminals really don't give a damn about what the Firearms Control Act says. Yeah, because they're criminals. So we're rather make the crime and the punishment more severe, but by saying we're going to restrict legal people's use and ownership of firearms is going to be the solution to the bad guys. It's like, I don't understand that. And if you're saying that because we're losing the firearms, well, the stats are showing you're losing the firearms at a much higher rate. And then when the police lose an R5 or an R4, R5, that is a fully automatic weapon, and that seems to make people more scared than a semi-automatic equivalent. When the military loses their firearms, it's really military-grade weapons, if you want to use that term. And as we saw, even with Norwood, we had policemen shot, I think earlier this year, shot by suspects, and it turns out that the firearms that the suspects were using came from the Norwood police station's own SAP-13 evidence locker. I mean, that's like the worst-case scenario. Your buddies are selling firearms that are then being used to kill you as a policeman from your own station. Now, that's just a horrible scenario.
So let's just talk quickly about this, Parrot, because I know it's something that you have some comments on too. You're an expert on risk and threat assessment and the management of those risks and threats. What are your thoughts on how the Marikana massacre happened, with a nice hindsight of 10 years and the benefit of now knowing a lot more than we did at the time?
Yeah, look, I wanted to first say, I haven't been following all what's come out from that, so I'm going to give you my layperson's knowledge opinion of it. I'm in two minds. If you look at some of the videos, you did see armed people approaching the police and allegedly shots fired. If that's the case, one can argue that the initial shooting might have had some justification. How far it went, you might have said exceeded what was justified under those circumstances. But I think ultimately, command and control is going to be very essential, and coordination of your resources in that type of incident. Now, whether that was effective and appropriate at the time, as I said, I haven't been following what's been taking place. It's a tragedy all around. I think, could we have avoided that? I think it is possible to have avoided the shooting. I think do our police have to have more emphasis on negotiation? And I do think, and I know some of the people who were involved in negotiations at that time, and they were of the opinion that, a lot more could have been achieved if negotiators had been given the time and the space to do so. So again, I don't know what the ultimate facts that have come out. As I said, I haven't been following it. But I do think we probably could have had a different outcome where less lives would have been lost if the policing approach had been perhaps different.
All right, then let me ask a couple of these are the sort of questions that will come up if people were trying to get a soundbite out of either of you. Where do you think the most dangerous place in South Africa is? If you were dropped there, Gideon, someone said to you, where would you least like to be dropped in South Africa, without or with your firearm? Where would that be?
So if I just went on murder statistics on their own, and with no further outside external reference, anywhere from Hanover Park to what's the other one, Lavender Hill, or anywhere on the Cape Flats, because some of those spots have murder rates in excess of 150 murders per 100,000 population, if you had to extrapolate from it, which is actually worse than most active war zones, with the exception of Syria. Wow. That was about 2 years ago.
Extraordinary.
So definitely no. And I think if we look at gang violence, I'll just give some additional info. There's approximately 100,000 gang members in Cape Town itself. If you understand that most gang members are men and they're between a certain age, that means that 1 in about every 20 men you meet in Cape Town is a member of a gang. If you concentrate those in just the communities in which they operate, the number probably goes a lot higher, probably 1 in every 10 or 1 in every 8 or possibly even 1 in every 5 people you run into is a member of a gang. That is how big these gangs have gotten. And you've got the Americans gang, which is still the biggest one out there, but their main rivals, which are the 28s, and their allies are getting kind of bigger. And the turf wars it's been hot for at least the past 5, 6, 7 years. The horror stories there that come out on a daily basis are extensive, and what makes it worse is this is still not a difficult problem to solve. But you look at what's happened with the police officers that are trying to take hard action against gang members. They either end up dead, or they end up rotated out of their position and redeployed somewhere else if they're high ranking enough. There appears to be, by all sort of observation, strong political level protection for these gangs. And we need to start asking some questions about that at a national political level as to who and why. Hypothetically, but I think we all know, kind of.
Do either of you have anything to say about our current Minister of Police, or even the commissioners that he's installed in various places? And do we have anybody in the police who you would love to see just rise to the top? I mean, are there ordinary officers? Because we can't tar everyone with the same brush. I'm always careful to say that there are always going to be good men and women who are trying to do as decent a job as possible. And yes, it's a difficult business being in crime prevention. It's a difficult business being in our police. They're not necessarily the most well looked after people. There are huge mental health issues that accompany so many of these people because of the nature of their work, and we don't look after them properly in South Africa. We just don't have the resources to be able to do that. Are there people in the police who you really think deserve a second shot at a top spot, or even a first shot at a top spot? Are there people who you've been impressed with? Even if you don't mention names, there might be stories of people who've done incredible things in the police.
Yeah, I think just on a senior level, look, I didn't know a lot of the generals when I was there, and I'm not too sure who's still there. But someone, unfortunately, I think his period in the police is coming to an end, would be someone like Godfrey Labuschagne, who is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is the head of the Hawks right now, who always struck me as a very highly intelligent guy. I think he left the police for a period when we were going through this very rough period politically.
Yes.
He was practicing as an advocate, and he was brought back. And he was always someone that struck me as, good, solid leader, honest person, hardworking, and highly intelligent. I was kind of excited when Labuschagne was made the acting national commissioner, because at one point when I was still in the police, he was the general in the division I was in, and he struck me as a highly intelligent person and very decisive, and he held people to account. I mean, our performance reviews that we would have every quarter were a nightmare. It was for 3 or 4 days of, you'd all be taken off to somewhere in the bush, and 3 or 4 days from 8 in the morning till 12 at night, literally, and he would grill you if you didn't achieve your goals and your targets, and he would push you to increase your targets. So I thought, wow, this would be a great guy to become the national commissioner. And then, of course, he left under a cloud of controversy, and there are still cases pending against him. So yes, and as you point out, there are great, amazing police members, and like you say, it's always good to acknowledge them. But if you look at the police as a brand, I mean, if you always say to someone, if a car company like Toyota made, let's for example say 1,000 cars a year, it doesn't matter whether 20 of them are absolutely fantastic, they run until they have over 1 million kilometers and never break down. If the other 980 vehicles break down at the drop of a hat, the brand is suffering. And that's SAPS as a brand suffering situation. But yes, there are these wonderful individuals. And then sadly, they don't often get the recognition and promotion. I mean, I know guys who've been amazing detectives who've solved some of the most high-profile cases, who've been warrant officers for 20 years, or captains for 25 years and not promoted, yet they're doing fantastic, amazing work. And that's just a situation that's demoralizing for other people who work hard and see, well, they're not promoted.
Is it as straightforward in the police that you only get a promotion if you are politically connected? Is it that simple?
I do think there's a lot of that, who you know, etc. And I do think there are situations where, it's just based on the merit. But having sat on some of these panels when we hire people, just in my own unit when I was still in the police, You have 5 people sitting on the panel. One of them is from the unit, for example, it would be me in that scenario. And then 4 other people are from, question documents in my case, or this portion of the forensics division. And they all get an equal vote on a candidate. And I'll be sitting there going, no, this is a terrible candidate. Their answers are nonsense. And they'll be sitting there going, no, that sounds very like a great candidate. And they can outvote you. And you end up, and that was frustrating for me as we expanded, I'd end up with people who I thought, you really shouldn't be in this unit. But I was outvoted by the 4 other people on the panel. Now, whether there was influence to, behind the scenes influence to those individuals, possibly, I don't know. So, just great people don't get promoted and recognized, and it's a difficult job. If you look at the United States, the typically law enforcement people serve for 20 years, and then they go on full retirement. We still have this issue of you retire at the age of, 60 or 65, no matter whether you had 40 years service or, 25, etc. Because police work is very demanding. So, if you started when you're 20 in the United States, by 40, you're on full retirement and you can start a second career somewhere else. We just kind of drive our policemen and women into the ground, specifically the ones that work hard and don't often give them the support and recognition that they need.
Last word goes to you, Gideon. Any
policemen and women still in the service? I think those that would do best in positions of leadership are unknown because they are passed over for promotion as a matter of rule almost. But then there's also the fundamental problem with the structure of the SAPS, and we have to ask the question, is it in 2022 still in the national interest to have a centralized national policing body as opposed to one that's broken up and down to local level and performs a federal duty? Because the need for law enforcement in Piet-Sonderwater versus in Tshwane Metro versus in the City Belt in Cape Town versus the Flats versus rural KZN, those are all very different needs. In my mind, to think that you can centralize decision-making on community policing at that level, sure, there are functions that you can perform at a national level in sort of FBI-type scenario, but I think that we have an organization that is obsolete, that is poorly led, that has become demoralized due to all these problems, and that has led also to an extreme loss of very talented people that have taken their skills, their knowledge, everything that they've built over years and left. And that is perpetuating the almost race to the bottom that we're seeing. And there are ways of addressing it, but I think we also need to have a debate on, do we still need the SAPS in its current form? And can't we perhaps replace it wholly with something far better?
Well, I hope we can, because both of you've hardly given me comfort this morning. But then I think that this is a problem that the whole world's dealing with at the moment. Silicide is going to have the very last word. I said you could, Gideon, but Silicide's kind of perplexed. The National Traffic Police in Lichtenburg just stopped and checked instead of asking for a bribe like the police in Brits. What the hell's going on? This kind of thing we don't understand. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Gideon. Thank you, Phumi. And we will see you tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. bright and early. That is the burning platform for this week. I hope it was interesting. I certainly want to thank our guests for bringing plenty of really, really relevant, useful, and new information to the show. And I hope that this has been something that will inform us all better. Let's all keep our eyes